All right, before the Great Depression, let's review and see who remembers anything. Who was a flapper? Don't particularly name someone in the room, but that would be fun too. So.
Ladies who were trying to get out of the whole stay-at-home woman.
Yeah, ladies who wanted to be men. So, let's see here. What's a good question? What did Coolidge do when there was a flood on the Mississippi? Yeah, so take care of yourself. That's some flooded basements over there. Get a shot back. Really, it's not the job of the federal government at all. Think of, wow. Do you remember when George Bush got hammered over Katrina? How old were you at that point? 3, and you remember that? When George Bush got hammered about Katrina and all the flooding in New Orleans. What's that?
What year was that? 2005.
I don't. 2005. You're saying?
I was like 14.
So, all right. I remember George Bush getting hammered about Katrina because he was slow responding. The national government was slow to respond. Can you imagine if he had gotten up and said, "Wow, New Orleans is flooded. Good luck." You go get them. That was another. The people in New Orleans were talking about how they got flooded out and they lost their houses. But then there's these pictures of them walking out of all the electronic stores carrying TVs. They're in water up to their knees and they're walking out with TVs and talking about, how bad it was and they got flooded out and they didn't take the buses that the state had provided to take them out of the city and they just stay there and then it's Bush's fault somehow. But anyway, it would have been really fun to see the president stand up and say, this is kind of a state issue. If people around the country want to give him money, that's fine, but I'm not going to take it from them and give it to them. That would have been fun.
I read that those people were giving a lot of FEMA cards, basically.
Oh, they were given money, they were given housing. There were people still in housing that got moved out of New Orleans.
I read one guy used it to get a divorce.
Oh, I mean, it was straight fraud. It was a complete disaster. Anyway, Coolidge wouldn't have done that. At least it would have been done over his protesting. So. All right, let's see here. What is determinism? Yeah, circumstances outside of his own control. So what's a good, you crash your parents' car into a tree. Just make sure your parents understand that it's not really your fault. Good luck with your dad. Right? Telling him it's not your fault. So, circumstances outside your control. That was under liberalism. I talked about there. Who won did John Scopes win his trial? He was being prosecuted for breaking the law. Was he found innocent or guilty?
He was guilty.
Found guilty. So, media portrayed it very, very differently. So, all right. Next main topic is the Great Depression, and we'll talk about the Great Depression, then talk about Hoover and how he responds to it, then talk about FDR and how he responds to it. But the Great Depression. Today I'd like to talk about the Depression itself initially, how it gets started, how it ripples and affects everybody. It really, really, really was a massive depression. I once read a textbook that described this. It wasn't a Christian textbook, so they're discounting the flood. But they said this was the first truly worldwide event. It affected countries all around the world. So it really was a massive thing. Liberals like to make up all kinds of disasters. They didn't make this one up. They did cause it, but they didn't make it up. So, all right, the Great Depression. Let me first of all, my first point is the main cause of the Depression. What caused this thing? We're going to look at some of the nuts and bolts of how it happened, but I don't want us to forget what was behind it all. All right, the main cause was government intervention into the economy. The government was the cause. If they had stuck to their biblical and in our case constitutional role we would not have a depression like we had here. The government was at the heart of it, government intervention. We're going to look at that somehow. The government manipulated and did some things that caused this depression. So lots of times people will point to individuals that were very, very foolish in buying stocks. We'll talk about the nuts and bolts, but people really were foolish. They would borrow money and buy stocks with it, and then cross their fingers that the price of stocks was going to go higher, so they could sell the stocks at the higher price, pay back the money they had borrowed, and have profit. Right? It gets really ugly when you borrow money, buy stocks, and the price goes this direction, right? And you sell for $20,000 less than you bought. Right? Then all of a sudden you can't pay back your loan, and that's really stupid. All right, if you're thinking, I'm gonna borrow money and invest in the stock market and become rich, it's really stupid. Okay, so there were people that did that. All right, and that was really stupid, and it was part of the picture. Right, but the damage that they could have done would have been severely limited if the government hadn't got involved. Right, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but what the government did was it forced down interest rates, so that the guy borrowing money didn't have to pay as much interest, so it was much easier to do this. Right? And now we have the Federal Reserve System in place, so that the bank who loans money, who wants to be the stupid person? It's always fun to have a... Thomas already volunteered, sorry. All right, Thomas goes to the bank in town, and he's rubbing his hands together. He's got a little tinfoil hat, and he's saying, I got this scheme, I'm going to make money. And the banker's looking at him and saying, you're a complete idiot. The banker's not going to give him money. But you have the government come in and say, if you loan money to Thomas and he never pays you back, we'll make up the difference. Then how does the banker lose? If he loans money to Thomas and Thomas pays it back and the bank makes profit on it. If he loans money to Thomas and Thomas never pays him back, the government gives him money. It's a win-win. Right? The government paved the way for people like Thomas to ruin our whole world. Thank you. So don't forget. I mean, lots of times people focus at investors like that, and they were really stupid. There's no way around that. Right? But the government set up a situation to where they could do so much damage in a free market system. If some crazy guy came to you, or a crazy girl, and said, won't you give me several $1,000s of your money, and I'm going to invest it, and we'll make money. You're not going to give them money for some crazy scheme like that, because it's your money. It's not going to happen. All right. So the free market would have put a damper on this thing here. And what we have is the government meddling and removing away some of that natural protection that the free market gives us. Sometimes it's fun to think about the natural protection of the free market, but there really is a lot there that protects us from damage like this. There might have been a ripple or a downturn, but it would have been nothing like what we have with the Great Depression. So if you get nothing else right on the test, when I ask what caused the Great Depression, put down government intervention. Okay, just memorize it, whatever. Government intervention, that is what's at the heart of this thing. So, all right, that's my first point. The second thing here is, let's look at some of the mechanics, the actual laws and things the government did here to make this possible. And I kind of already hinted at some of it, but let's look at it. Okay, first point is that throughout the 1920s, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates low. Made it very easy to borrow money. Imagine that, I don't know, Jasmine, she's not here. She went into the bank and said, I want to borrow $100,000 and I'll pay it back next year. And the bank said, all right, we're going to charge you 0% interest. She borrows $100,000, keeps it for a year, and goes back and takes $100,000. How do you lose? I mean, you could put it in a savings account and get 0.1% interest, and you make out. That lower that interest rate, the easier it is, the less expensive it is. Really, when you think of interest rate, you want to think of the price. If McDonald's, almost said Whopper, if McDonald's lowered the price of the Whopper, then we've got problems. If they lower the price of the Big Mac, to half of what it is, or pick your favorite, the double quarter pounder with bacon, or on my trip I was at a restaurant, I didn't get it, but they sold a 3/4 pound cheeseburger. That's I got it was just a 1/3 pound cheeseburger. That was pretty good, but 3/4 pound. All right, imagine that the price of that thing gets cut in half. All right, the people that are wanting to buy it gets cheaper. The demand is there. So here, what happens is the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates low, artificially low, lower than the market price. The market will regulate this thing. Okay, so we got Thomas and Jasmine, the crazy people borrowing money, and who wants to be the rich guy that's got money? Everybody. That's me. So, all right, Matthew's got money. You guys go to Matthew to borrow money. Or maybe Matthew and Lawrence both have money, and you go to one and want to borrow money, and he says, well, I'm going to charge you 15% interest. And Lawrence says, well, you know what, I'll do 14. And that negotiation, it sets up a market price, a market interest rate. What the government did was just artificially push that thing down. Okay. Now, we're not here to talk about the mechanics of how that happened. There's a whole other world of how the government does that, tinkering with interest rates. We're not talking about that. But just in the end, they're able to get that interest rate down. Today, they've done much the same thing. The interest rate, my mortgage is 3.3 7/8, which is high. I mean, you can get them down more towards 3% at sometimes. My first mortgage was 6 7/8, and back in the ancient times of about 2001. And my mortgage lady said, you'll never see interest rates lower than this. Right? And then the Federal Reserve starts tinkering with things, and the interest rate just keeps going down and down and down. So it is it is just artificial. The government did much the same thing back here in the 20s. Right? So we have the interest rate kept artificially low. I should back up and mention one other thing before we go to the next point. The Federal Reserve System that was just created made this possible. Before this Federal Reserve System, the government had no way to do this. It didn't have any mechanism to influence the interest rates at all. Now with the Federal Reserve System, we have that. And in their very first opportunity, they blow it. Completely blow it. So. Let's leave it there. Federal Reserve kept interest rates low, and the mechanism to do that was that Federal Reserve System. Right? Second thing is that a lot of people begin borrowing money to buy stocks. And it really was the raging fad of the day in some circles to borrow money and buy stocks. Okay. Now, we don't have to get deep into the technicalities, but when you think of stock, you want to think partial ownership of a company. If you buy a stock of Apple or SanDisk or Springfield Armory, you're a partial owner of the company. All right, that's partial ownership. So people who are buying little bits of these companies, and if the company does well, then their little piece becomes more valuable. If the company does bad, their little piece becomes less valuable. All right, but you're buying a partial ownership in the company. That's all the stock is. All right. The situation here where the government kept interest rates low set up a condition where lots of people began borrowing money and buying stocks, and it caused the price of stocks to just keep going up really artificially. There wasn't a natural increase. It was an artificial increase. Think of the prices at Wrestle-Rama. You know, the prices are artificially high. You walk out of Wrestle-Rama with the $50 pie that you bought, and all of a sudden it's worth $12 or $15. It's just an artificial increase. Let me give you some particular numbers. Jasmine here, very foolish, one of those flappers. Jasmine. She borrows some money. Who wants to tell us how much she borrowed? Well, let's pick some easy numbers. Let's say she borrows $10,000. And she buys some stock. I will let somebody tell me what company. Or picking on Jasmine, we can have fun. Microsoft in 1920. That would be really good. So, no. Bath and Body Works. All right. Okay, and just to pick out some numbers, let's say that when she buys these, the stocks are $2. So how many stocks does she have? Oh, this is math class here. 5,000. All right. 6 months later. Okay, there's other people borrowing money. Lots of people are buying stocks. This puts artificial, if you understand supply and demand, it puts artificial demand on the price, which pushes it up. So 6 months later, she owns this Bath and Body Works stocks, all these stocks, and they're up to $3 a share. All right. When she sells those, how much money does she make? Well, she makes $15,000, and then she's got to pay back the loan with some interest. So she's, $4,800 or something. That's not too bad for none of your money. She didn't pull money out of her savings. She borrowed it. She used your money. Thank you. Right? And then she would take that money again and, go to another company and buy stock there and let it run a year or 6 months down the road and then sell it and make money. And what happened here is through a good chunk of the 20s up until the crash, people routinely did this and made money. Right? Because of that upward push on the price, it didn't really go down. There were some fluctuations, but you routinely made money. So, it's easier than, think of how long it would take you to earn $5,000 at your job. It'd be easier to borrow $10,000, invest, and in 6 months just sell the stocks and walk away with the money. That'd be easier. And this is happening, again, not everybody, but enough of society involved in here that it pushed the prices of all the stocks up across the board. So we just have stocks going up and up and up all through the 20s because of this. If you want some particular numbers, AT&T went from about 180 to 335. General Electric, buy them back, went from 128 to almost 400. That's per stock. Montgomery Ward, are they still around?
Who?
Montgomery Ward, are they gone now? If you don't know the company, they're probably gone. All right, 133 to 466 and others. All right, so we have just this, these stocks continue basically to just march higher and higher. You buy at a certain point, wait a little bit, sell at the new value and make money. And this was happening routinely, people making money. Okay, so we have low interest rates and people then taking advantage of this to buy lots of stocks and it pushing the value of stocks up artificially. All right, a third thing here in the nuts and bolts of this. We have the low interest rates. We have the people buying stocks with borrowed money. Very, very foolish. It's not necessarily wrong to buy stocks, but borrowing money to do that is very foolish. The third thing is that there began to be a push in Congress, there had actually been this push for a while, for a higher tariff. There was a particular tariff that passes in 1930, which is after the crash, I know, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff. Yeah, we'll mention it under Hoover. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff that raised the tariff. All right. It seems like all through history we want a higher tariff, higher tariff. This thing raised it. Now, it doesn't pass till after the Depression hits, but a lot of businessmen didn't want this thing, and they were very afraid of how this would disrupt the economy. If we have a higher tariff, it's going to force the prices of goods up. Okay, if, I don't know, some cell phone companies bringing in phones, and the government says instead of paying 50 cents a phone to bring it into the country, you've got to pay $10 a phone to bring it into the country. All right. Then the price of that phone is going to have to go up by $9.50 if the company is going to continue to make money. All the domestic manufacturers can also raise their price by $9.50. Right? I mean, the price of everything goes up, or maybe they'll raise it by $9.25. They have a little bit of edge on the market, but it's going to cause the price of everything to go up. And there were a lot of business people who were very scared of what this tariff would do when it passes. In 1929, in the fall of that year, prior to the crash, this tariff made it through a couple of key committee votes. I don't want to rehash how a bill becomes law, but if you're familiar with that process, it's kind of a long, drawn-out thing. But it was getting voted out of a committee and going on to the full House for a vote. So there were some key votes that it made it through. So it looked very likely that this thing was going to happen. So we have in the fall of 1929 a lot of fear in the business community of this new tariff and how it was going to create a downturn in the economy. Okay, so we have that fear raging in people's mind at this point. And then the fourth point, the fourth thing here with this, how we get to this crash going. Hoover becomes president in 1929, and he makes two changes through the Federal Reserve System. This thing was, at some point this was going to blow up. It'd be like taking a balloon down to Mr. Bishop's air compressor and starting to fill it up. At some point it's going to pop. All Hoover did was take a needle and poke it before it popped on its own. It was going to happen at some point. But he comes in here in 29, makes two changes. The first is he removed some of the Federal Reserve protection from banks that loaned for stocks. Okay, so we talked about how Thomas comes in, or it's Jasmine, whoever comes in to borrow money from the bank. The bank is thinking, if I lose money on this guy, the Federal Reserve is going to help me out anyway, so it's not a big deal. He changed the rules so that if there's a bank, and I don't know the particulars of how much, but if they were involved too much in loaning money to people to buy stocks, they lost that protection. So what's that going to do to that bank's willingness to loan money? Go down quickly, all right? It's going to dry up the market here of people that are willing to loan money for that. And then the second thing is he raised interest rates. And again, it's not quite like our current president who just arbitrarily with executive orders does things. Has to do it through the Federal Reserve, but he's able to raise interest rates to get up to a screaming 6%, which is actually, that's kind of a normal rate, but the free market should pick it anyway. Raises interest rates. All right, so we have two things here that dried up really the ability of people to borrow money and buy stocks. They're paying a higher interest rate if they're able to get a loan, and then lots of them aren't even able to get loans. So people like Jasmine, now they buy the stock at $2 a share, and there's nobody to buy it. So the price goes down. So now instead of selling at $3, she sells at $1 or 50 cents, or goes to the bank and throws them all the stock certificates and says, here, I'm walking away from this thing. She's losing money, the bank is losing money, and we have that on a wide scale all across the country. Many, many, many people stuck in this position where they borrowed money to buy stocks that are now worth less than they were originally. So maybe an analogy today, how many have heard of people that are underwater on their mortgages? All right, they borrowed money at a certain point for their house, and then the market crashed and their house is worth less than what they owe. All right, so we have here people with these stocks that are underwater. They owe more than the stock is worth. Okay? Layer on top of that, well, as the effect of that begins to settle in, we see the stock market wavering and then starting to drop. And then, in fact, on top of that, the tariff that in the fall of that year looks like it's coming, and it does actually come the next year. Businessmen begin to get very scared. So they start actively trying to get rid of stocks and get cash and other things that aren't quite so susceptible to changes in the market. So we have those things layering on top of each other to cause the price of these stocks to just plummet. Did I lose you? Some of you have the same dull stare no matter what we're talking about. It could be cupcakes, it could be little fuzzy bunnies doing funny things on YouTube, or economics. It's the same look all across the board. But it's fine if every now and then you smile and act like you understand. It's encouraging. Not you. No, the thumbs up is good enough. The smile was scary. Alyssa was laughing. Yes. It's a good day. All right. I might ask you about this in the future, so please ask me questions. Who? Yes.
Was it the stock companies or was it the bank that at this time was making it available where you could buy one stock and then borrow money on that one stock to buy 9 more stocks for the price of one?
That would have been through the banks, marginal buying. That really is, it's like throwing gasoline onto this fire. Just made it blow up even worse. But yeah, I was going to not even mention it, but it was there. It was real. It made it worse. All right, I'm trying to think of, can we think of a fad item that, none of the fad items I think of were fads for you. You guys remember the little silly bands? Those little shaped, little dinosaur shaped wristbands? Was that when you were kids? It wasn't that long back. I'm trying to think of something relatively recent. When I was a kid, you remember Cabbage Patch Kids? You might see them in an antique store or something. I liked the Garbage Pail Kids. They were more fun. But anyway, those little things. At a certain point, I don't remember. It was 10 or 15 cents per thing. And if you wait 6 months later, once nobody wants them anymore, they're in packages of 20 for a nickel or something. The price of them just plummeted because the demand wasn't there anymore. What's another fad product?
Silly Putty.
Silly Putty. Or what was the hottest toy when you were a kid?
Beanie Baby.
What's that?
Hot Wheels.
Hot Wheels? Those are still around. What about those little stupid
The Beanie Baby.
Beanie Babies? Remember the Beanie Baby? I don't know. Think of some product that everybody wants and the price goes up for it. As soon as the fad is over, it's just a little stupid stuffed animal with beans in it. Nobody wants it anymore, and the price comes back down. So what happened here essentially is there was a fad, and it was fueled by the government, allowing it with the low interest rates, and that it was fed by the government. And then the government stripped it all away, and the price fell right back down to where it should be. And everybody was stuck with all of these loans based on the high prices. Okay. Let me give you some real numbers if you want them. That crash that took place, well, let me back up. Let me help you with your outline at least. I've got all of that as the mechanics of how we get this crash. The next point is the actual crash. It was Tuesday, October the 29th, that we have the bottom fall out of the stock market. That we have these prices just plunge dramatically that day. There had been some fluctuations prior to that, but this one day it just plummeted down. And over about the next 2 weeks, these are some of the price drops that we have. A company called White Sewing Machine went from $40 to $1. All right. That hurts. Westinghouse went from $289 to $102. All right, so you're buying here at $289 and selling here at $102, or buying here at $40 and selling here at $1. Ouch is the word for it. So you might be thinking, well, then just hold on to it. Why sell it? Wait till the market recovers. And there's some truth to that. Wait till it recovers. But they had borrowed money on certain terms. They had to pay it back at a certain point. So they couldn't just say, well, I'm going to wait 10 years. I've heard some stats that if you bought stocks right before the crash, the day before, within, I forget, 8 or 9 years, you would be back on par. It'd be even to what you had before the crash. But these people couldn't wait that long. The bank, they had a 12-month loan or something. They had to pay the money back. So they were forced to sell at these crazy low prices and just get killed, some of them. Now that was the immediate drop. If you run out the numbers over the next year and a half or so, we get drops like this. AT&T from $336 to $20. And U.S. Steel went from $261 to $21. And so it just kept going down and down and down and down, right? If you want to try to wrap your mind around it, somewhere around $30 billion gets lost in this initial plunge. Money lost this way. You buy at 40 and you sell at $1. About $30 billion, private people's money, evaporates at that point. Now, if you're George Bailey, and It's a Wonderful Life, and you wait till after the crash and buy everything at the bottom. There's a scene in there where he's talking to the banker. Harry Potter. Oh, different guy. Very different guy. He never talked to Harry Potter. Wow. Talking to Potter. How did I get that? And Potter says to him, you saved the savings and loan and I saved everything else. He's saying what he did when everything fell out to the bottom, he bought all this stuff real cheap. All right? So if you weren't meddling in the stock market like a maniac, when the bottom fell out, you can make a big profit. So when you get a chance to travel in time, you go back and you pick the war you want to fight in, go back to like 1930 and buy a bunch of stocks and then travel 15 years in the future and just live like a king. Right? So if you can buy at the bottom, you're doing pretty good.
Wasn't there a big drop in September of last year where people also bought?
Yes. Oh, you're saying currently? Yeah. It goes up and down, and so I have some money in an IRA that's in the stock markets, and I generally just don't pay attention. I just let it sit there. So at some point I'll have to, when I get closer to retirement, actually pay attention. So. Okay, so massive amount of loss here is what happens. October the 29th. October the 20th. So that was the initial crash. When we talk about the crash that day, prices plunge dramatically and then just continue to plunge. Now, how do we go from that to this gigantic worldwide depression? All right, up until this point, we have Jasmine and Thomas that lose their shirts. All right, figuratively speaking, they borrowed $10,000. They can't pay it back. They're in a world of trouble. How does it go from affecting them to all the rest of us that were sane people and didn't get involved?
They default on the loan, therefore the bank goes bankrupt because it didn't have the loan. It's a lost money.
Okay, yeah, it was the banks. As Thomas doesn't pay his loan back, the bank is losing money. And it happened enough that banks began to go bankrupt. And here's the numbers over the next couple of years. Let me find them. In 29, 659 banks went bankrupt. In 30, 1,352. In 31, 2,294. And then it's getting better. It's only 1,456 in 32. Banks going bankrupt. If you had money in that bank, it was gone. There's no Federal Reserve to repay you. No FDIC insurance like we have today. Gone. And I'm not trying to argue that FDIC insurance is a good thing. Right? It's just gone. So Grandma and Grandpa who've been saving their whole life and they have some money in the bank, it's gone. Your older brother who's been saving money to go to college, gone. It's wiped out. If you ever talk to, they're really old people now, but if you ever talk to an older person that says, I don't trust those banks, right? I remember as a kid hearing people talk like that. They remember people's savings just getting wiped out. They didn't want to put their money in the bank because so when these banks go bankrupt, anybody that had money there, it's gone. If you remember the scene in It's a Wonderful Life, it's a beautiful picture for this. I like the imagery of the scene. It's raining. Everybody has on a black trench coat and a black umbrella. When there's the run on the bank, everybody's scurrying in the streets. The siren goes by on the police car goes by with a siren on, and all the imagery is right. And everybody's rushing to the bank. How many have seen the movie? Okay. They're in the bank there, and they start using their honeymoon money to pass it out. And they're saying, "No, just take what you need for the next week or so. We'll make it through." And they get down, and they've got the $2, Mama dollar and Papa dollar. Have a big family and put them in the safe. If they had ran out of money, they would have had to declare bankruptcy, and all the people who had invested money there would lose everything. Now, it's a savings and loan, a little bit different, but the idea would work. They lost everything. Okay? We have that happening around the country. I mean, imagine if you've got your money in the bank in town and you hear that it's going to go bankrupt. I'm going to go try to get my money. Everybody wanted to try to go get their money, and the bank ran out of money. And this happens over and over, literally thousands of times across the country.
So do you think if people had not tried to get their money out of the banks could have survived, possibly?
Yes, it would have been less for sure than went bankrupt, but I want my money. I don't care if you lose yours, I want my money. It's really unrealistic to expect everybody to be willing to wait. So. Okay, so that's how this thing happens. We have at the beginning we said government intervention. That's at the heart of it. There were lots of stupid people involved, but those stupid people would have been hampered in the damage they could do. Right? The bank, if it hadn't been told prior that they would get covered if they lost money in loans, wouldn't have loaned out money to all those people to buy stocks. And when the stock market crashed and all these idiots that had borrowed money, it wouldn't have affected the bank. Mom and pop and grandma and grandpa, they wouldn't have lost all their savings. Right? This is the banks is what caused this to ripple and cause such damage across the country. Many thousands of people who were uninvolved at all with stocks get hammered when their bank goes closed. All right, very, very ugly. Okay, questions about the banks. That is the one thing that caused it. Except for the banks going bankrupt, there have been a whole lot of people that lost their money, would have been jumping out of windows in New York or something, and there'd be a story about this rash of suicides, and then we'd be done with it. So.
What was the interest rate before the Federal Reserve passed out?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know what it was. I know it was raised to about 6%. So it might be as crazy low as it is today.
I wonder what happened if you like raised about 0.5% every 3 months.
It might have. It wouldn't have. It would have spread this thing out. Maybe not as done so much damage. But a better solution is to get the government out. Let the market determine the interest rate. So. Okay. As far as my notes, I have the stock market crash on the 29th, and then I've got the depression deepens, and there I've got all of the banks going bankrupt, some other things to list there that are kind of the ripple effect of the stock market crash, some other things that happen. Banks going bankrupt, that's very, very important. We have unemployment rising drastically. Businesses that were saving money lost it. Anybody operate a small business or a lawn mowing service or something? Or anybody sell pop in the dorm? You have to have some cash up front to buy the pop to make money. Imagine if you're a business owner and all that cash that you're using to buy products to sell gets lost in the bank. And how do you buy raw products to turn into some product to sell? You can't. Right? So it's just caused damage everywhere. It affects the business world. Millions and millions of people here going into unemployment. We have exports dropping drastically. The crash itself and the ripple effect with the banks would have caused that naturally. We have shortly after the crash in 30, that Hawley Smoot Tariff that everyone was scared about, it actually happens. So just at the point where we really needed free trade, we shoot ourselves in the other foot just to make sure that we really hurt. Okay, and then industrial production, which kind of goes along with unemployment, just the amount produced in our factories and things drops by 50% over the next several years. It's not overnight, but over the next several years we have the production of our factories cut in half. All right, so a massive depression here set off by the stock market crash. But again, don't I get really irritated. In fact, there was a textbook I wanted to use a couple of years ago for a college class. And I really liked the textbook until we got to here. And then it started talking about the greed of people and the free market being unfettered and how it causes these types of depressions, and I couldn't take it anymore. All right, I really liked the book till that point, but this is not the free market failing. This is government intervention failing. Just like the housing market crashed in 2001 or whenever it was, that was not the free market failing like Bush claimed. It was the government intervention failing. Guess it was in 2001. It'd be like 2008 for that. All right, any questions about the Great Depression? That's a very open-ended question. All right, let's at least start into Hoover. Maybe we can finish Hoover today, we'll see. And that will leave us with FDR, the guy who saved us from the Great Depression. You know, oh well, we'll get there. Hoover, he's the president. He comes in after Coolidge. And we're going to, the Great Depression definitely dominates his presidency, but we'll look at it like we've looked at other presidents, domestic and foreign affairs, but all of the common thread through all of it really is the Depression. So, all right, domestic affairs. A couple of things he did here. He really is a very mixed bag with the Depression. He didn't jump whole hog into the federal government giving money to people right away. Eventually gets close to that, but very mixed bag. He does several things here initially trying to address the Depression. The first thing is he pushed for local and state governments to do things, which if there is going to be government assistance, that's the place to have it. The federal government has no business or constitutional authority to do it. So he pushed for states and cities to have, hire people to build state parks and build paths to the parks and build roads and build buildings, push for that type of thing. Even there's some serious economic flaws with thinking that's going to get us out of the Depression. Okay, all right, second thing he did is he called on people to give money to charity. That's fine and good. Your neighbor's starving to death, help them, right? So push for people to give to charity. He also encouraged, he couldn't dictate this, but encouraged business owners not to lower wages, not to lower wages or prices. Wow. The thought was if the company can keep charging the same price for its products and keep paying the employees the same rate, then that will help bring us out of the economy. Can anybody think of some problems with that in a major economic downturn to keep charging the same price? No one can buy it. Right? These guys, they got to sell products to be able to pay their employees. So again, it really isn't practical to expect that to have a major thing. So really the point is he initially looks at places other than the national government structure to address this thing. Individuals, counties, charities, tries to get them to address it. So in time, though, he does begin to get the federal government involved, get the national level of government involved. So he begins to do a couple of things here. The first one actually was pretty good. Reducing income taxes. That always creates an economic upturn. So he was able to push through a bill reducing income taxes. And then the second thing that is not so good is he began to organize public works programs. Programs where the federal government is building something, building a road, building a dam, things like the Hoover Dam, right? Building these large projects. And the excuse or the reasoning was that the government would hire all these people to come and work. And then they now have money that they can spend in the economy, and it's going to ripple around, and everybody's going to be somehow wealthy because of it. He was cautious with it. He did warn about people becoming dependent upon it, and he actually made this statement. He said, prosperity cannot be restored by a raid on the public treasury. We're not going to get rich by just raiding the government's money. But in the end, he does begin to do that. He spends about $2.25 billion on these public works programs. I know today that's nothing, but at that point, that was some significant money. There. So public works, and one other thing for him.
At least you made it work.
Yes, you're right. I'll take that. They were required to work. All right, one more thing he does here with the federal government getting involved is he begins to offer assistance to banks that were struggling. This really backfires and doesn't do any good. But his thinking was, if there's some bank that's on the verge of going bankrupt, they're down to just Mama Dollar and Papa Dollar or something, they can go to the government, and the government will give them some cash and help keep them afloat, et cetera, things like that. But can anybody think, if you've got your money in town and you hear that they just appealed to the government to bail them out and keep them afloat, what your first response might be if you've got money in that bank? I'm going to get my money out. Exactly, and that's lots of time. The banks that did this, it typically hurt them because everybody was all of a sudden scared to death of them, and they didn't want anything to do with it. So anyway, he did attempt that. Didn't really work. FDR does a much better job of it. I'm completely joking, but he does a similar type program. So, all right, domestic affairs here for Hoover. Very mixed bag. Doesn't want the government involved initially, the federal government, but eventually does get it involved significantly. So, all right, the other thing for him is foreign affairs. Foreign affairs. What's that?
Destroy the economics of the world.
Yes, share the wealth or the poverty with everybody else. So, all right, two main things here with his foreign affairs. The first is the Hawley-Smoot Tariff. This is the one I've referenced earlier. How would you like to be Representative Smoot? Hawley-Smoot Tariff. This is passed in 1930. And I don't have the exact, oh no, right there's about a 55% tariff, roughly. It varied some from product to product, but about 55%. So you bring in a product that's worth $1,000, the tariff is $550 to bring that into the country. Massive. This was, all kinds of people warned the government about this. There was 1,000 economists that put together a petition begging him to veto this thing. There's lots of people warning about this. But it gets passed, he signs it, becomes law in 1930, and it aggravates the situation. All right, now, the tariff increased the price for any companies to compete in America. It increased the price of our companies to compete in other countries because they typically would match our tariff. All right, so it caused international trade to basically come to a screeching halt. I mean, nobody wanted to trade. Imagine if Pastor Armacost orchestrates things, he's in cahoots with the bookstore, and there's a 55% tariff to bring products onto campus from other stores. So you go to Walmart and you buy some pens and pencils are worth $10. To bring them onto the campus and use them, you've got to pay $5.50 for that privilege. But if you go to the bookstore, there's no tariff. All right, it's going to funnel a lot of business to the bookstore. We'll see. They'll have little iPads for selling there and all kinds of stuff because they know that if you live on campus, you pretty much can't go anywhere and beat the price there because of the tariff. And that's what it did. It just completely chopped international trade. Nobody was trading. I thought I had the percentages here. I mean, it's down to a quarter or a third of what it was prior to this. It dropped. It was a massive drop. So at the very point we needed it, it gets cut drastically. So the Hawley-Smoot Tariff, that was passed. And then the other thing to mention here with foreign affairs is the war debts. We saw before under Coolidge, some of the countries having trouble paying it off, and Germany just printing marks and distributing them around like they were candy. The Depression obviously aggravates this thing even more. So what Hoover initially does is just suspend payments for 1 year, trying to give everybody a chance to get their feet on the ground. But in time, everybody stops paying except for Finland. They were the only one to pay us back all the money. Everybody else in time falls further and further behind. And then towards the end of the 30s, there was another minor world event that caused us to just forget all of the debts. Anybody know what that event was? Yeah, what could that be? Global warming? No. World War II. So by the time we get to World War II, the whole debt thing is just thrown out the window. So, all right, war debts. Hoover. Questions there? Mixed bag. Very mixed bag.
Wasn't he the Secretary of the Treasury under Coolidge?
He worked under Coolidge. There's a guy named Mellon that was. He might have been. Mellon he worked with the budget with a guy named Mellon. I don't remember. Could be. What's that? Under Coolidge? I should know that, shouldn't I? Yeah, but I don't remember what he did. Thank you, Matthew, for asking a question I don't know the answer to. All right, any questions at all? Next Tuesday, we'll learn the glories of socialism. All right, the New Deal. See you then.